and welcome to the Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sophia Ononye, founder and CEO of the Sophia Consulting Firm, a WebMD certified life science marketing and communications consultancy that was established in New York City with the goal of amplifying scientific innovation. The goal of this podcast is to showcase the importance of science advocacy, health equity, and influential leadership through conversations with senior life science leaders who share a unique leadership journey, corporate vision, and industry outlook. My guest today is Dr. John Whyte, Chief Medical Officer of WebMD, a leading provider of health information services to consumers, physicians, healthcare professionals, employers, and health plans. WebMD's mission is to bring you objective, trustworthy, and timely health information. Dr. Whyte and I connected on LinkedIn, where we have over 900 mutual connections, including the president and CEO of Bio, Dr. Michelle McMurray, who is also a previous podcast guest. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the show, Dr. Whyte.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here as well. And I think that's a great story of networking and connections that we didn't know each other beforehand. And now we've created this relationship and then getting to know each other better, every month or so.
Yes, and that's the beauty of social media. But I also would like to thank you because you were able to help facilitate my first publication of WebMD, where I was very excited to share my perspectives as a Nigerian American on the recent malaria vaccine approval. So thank you for that opportunity as well.
Absolutely. It was a great piece. You're a terrific writer. So always happy to help promote that.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Now we're going to start with my favorite question, which is fairly simple, but I guess a little challenging in its own way. What is your definition of scientific innovation?
My definition of scientific innovation is one that actually advances both personal health and public health. So is it going to help me live longer and have higher quality of life, right? We just don't want longevity, we want quality. And is it going to help populations as well? That's where I think true scientific innovations have value. All too often we have some type of innovation, but we don't really measure it and say, well, what outcome does it have on patients? We've been focused on kind of what's cool and what's glitzy, as opposed to how does this improve my quality of life? Is it just one more diagnostic imaging test? Is it just one more pill? And I think true scientific innovation puts us a couple leaps forward, not just, little mini steps or status quo. So that's where I feel is important, and not getting too technical. We have these non-inferiority trials. I mean, what does that even mean? It's not any worse.
I mean,
that can't be our standard for innovation going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you talk about scale and measurability, right? So ultimately, it's about impact, global health, public health, thinking collectively, how many patients can benefit from this innovation? So thank you for that. But then I'm thinking that innovation has taken a few years to define. So what age did you decide to become a physician? And who would you think your most impactful mentor or advisor was across your career journey to date?
Yeah, I'd have to give credit to my parents, especially my mother. But both my parents, they always empowered me with this belief that I could do anything. That if I wanted to be a doctor, I could become a doctor. My mother was always like, Johnny, you can do it. And it always gave me that confidence that I think allowed me, to go to medical school, to become a physician, to become, an executive. I always thought I would be a surgeon early on. So even at a young age, and I'm not a surgeon, I don't see patients every day. I only see patients, once a week, but that's how I view my identity. But I also was open to this idea, to the point about innovations. I didn't want to just impact that individual patient in front of me. Very important relationship, and one that I've treasured over the years. It's really a unique type of experience. But I also wanted to impact, society, and able to do that as a regulator, at FDA or at CMS, and then as a, health communicator and policy maker. So in my mind, I see it all as the same thing, but other people may look at it a little differently.
Now, you tasked yourself on making an immeasurable impact on patients' lives, and I think that that's really remarkable. And now I'm curious as well, what inspired your transition from the FDA to WebMD?
Well, I've known about the power of communication, the ability to impact large numbers of people. And, WebMD has 80 million people come to the website every month. It has 9 million users on Medscape. It has this enormous reach that I thought about, I want to impact how people consume information. If I want to give people better information that's going to lead to better health, then, WebMD is the place to go to. And it's really much more than an online platform. It's really the evolution of search, which traditionally been, what would you do? You'd look online, you print everything off, and you'd bring it to the doctor, and the doctor would just kind of put it to the side and do whatever he or she wanted. Whereas now what we're really doing is connecting that content to care. So I have knee pain. What do I need to do about it? Can I see a rheumatologist, an orthopedist the next day? Can I get a lab test that can be ordered online today that I can go get tomorrow? Or maybe I can even do the testing at home with a self-kit. So that's what's really exciting as we move towards more patient centricity and empowering the patient to take control of their own care, not removing the physician and other health professional by any means, but really focusing on patients. And that's not something that we've done before.
Right. The data empowered patient is really what we're looking at today, right? And I think that WebMD, anyone that doesn't know of WebMD or hasn't used WebMD at some point, for the most random and the most intensive searches, it doesn't even matter. So thank you for walking us through that journey. Obviously, I absolutely love your coronavirus in context series.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I think you've done a great job. You featured luminaries like Dr. Phil. I believe the Regeneron Chief Scientist was also there. So what have you learned so far from these leaders, and how have these insights helped to shape your role as WebMD's Chief Medical Officer?
I really have been impressed with the passion and the commitment, particularly of the scientists and the physicians who really have worked day to day during this pandemic. Remember, early on, they put their lives at risk in many ways, treating patients that were coming into the hospital with COVID when we didn't have a vaccine, when we didn't have any therapeutics. So they really deserve a lot of credit for helping us get to the point where we are today. What I've learned, and I've interviewed over 325 guests, a range of folks, from the scientists that you mentioned to some, pop culture icons like Ariana Huffington and Deepak Chopra. It's really about also remembering we have to take care of ourselves right now too. There is a mind-body connection. So we have an infectious disease pandemic, but we're also having a mental health pandemic. And we can't forget that. We can't focus too much on just scientific discovery and not think about the broader picture of health, which is also mental health, and really have learned there is no physical health without mental health. And that's partly what I've learned. I haven't always focused on that as much, prior to the pandemic as a physician or a policy person. So really have recognized the value of mental health. And you mentioned Dr. Phil, and I think, he's been one all along that has talked about that mind-body connection. And I think we've all have learned about it, over these past 20 months.
Yeah, extremely well said. And I couldn't agree with a better mission and a better time to really bring to light. You mentioned over 300 interviews. I mean, time flies and knowledge grows, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm curious about a different angle now, and as it relates to diversity. So I'm curious to know what WebMD is doing to address diversity, equity, and inclusion from a thought leadership perspective to ensure that minority health is properly addressed.
Right. And I'm going to tell you, I was interested in this issue of diversity and inclusion before it became popular. Right. So even back at my time at FDA, I made sure, and I was very proud, that I had one of the most diverse workforces that was out there. And I remember a meeting where a bunch of pharmaceutical representatives came in, and one of them commented to me afterwards that they were so impressed that and you know, the FDA always sits on one side, industry tends to sit on the other. It just happens like that. I try to mix it up. And he was someone of color. And he said to me, he was so impressed that he looked across the table at FDA, and there were 3 men and 2 women of color. And that's not something that he had seen. And that was through my effort. And my work at FDA was also focused, as you may know, in including more minorities in clinical trials. And how do we do it? And partly it was being transparent. You know, at WebMD, I've been very focused on, kind of a great team. Where's our representation of images? I remember once early on when I got there, and I was like, well, you know, why don't we have any images, you know, in this slide deck or, you know, on this story of people of color? And the first response was, well, you know, Getty Images doesn't have a lot of those pictures that were used. And I was like, you know what? And this was several years ago. Well, then we don't need to use Getty Images. We can use something else. And then the next iteration was the classic, someone of color, they're the patient. That's like, that's not going to work. I was like, you know what? The person of color needs to be the doctor. Okay? Not a pharmacist, not a nurse, the doctor. So we worked on that, and we made great progress on that. But what's even more important on the Medscape side, we created this whole diversity and inclusion initiative where we're addressing these issues on panel discussions, where we're making sure it's embedded in all of our educational content. So it's not as if, oh, okay, now here's the diversity section. Right. But rather, when we're talking about dermatologic diseases, we're talking about psoriasis, we're talking about tinea, you know, whatever it is, we're talking about how those may manifest differently in people of color. We're talking about how pain control is managed in people of color, and we know there are differences. So it's being embedded in the entire content and not as a type of standalone section either. So I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing on this, and Medscape particularly has been a leader on this in terms of medical education. And then on the WebMD side, we're doing what I think is a terrific job in really working on diversity of images. But then also in terms of messaging as well in the content that we provide.
Right, diversity of thought. Thank you for sharing that perspective. If we switch to a macro view, I'm curious to know if there are any emerging technologies or startup companies that you're currently excited about and why.
You know, it's interesting you say that because we're starting a health tech series, your health on tech, and really looking at these advances. You know, I'm interested in this idea of things like these bath mats that can identify who it is in your family that's standing on it, right, by your footprint. And it's checking some biometrics literally every day, your weight, your heart rate, your oxygenation. And then it's just automatically collecting the data. I don't have to input anything. And then I can look at trends over time. I'm interested in those things that instead of providing single point in time measurements, I'm looking at these continuous measurements that are really going to help me know early on in terms of diagnosis of disease or management of disease. I'm interested, I've heard about this mirror that's going to help identify skin cancer and skin conditions. So that would really be amazing.
Wow.
I've been fascinated. I'm trying to get more information on this toilet. So you would add this device on your toilet, and it would analyze your stool and urine every day. So it would check for perhaps blood in your stool, which could be cancer or it could be hemorrhoids. It'd be even better to look for cancer fragments, cancer cells, right? It could analyze your urine for ketones, right? For diabetes or UTI. That's true preventive medicine, isn't it? That's true precision medicine, literally every day. That's what I think is the future, not these lasers that can detect your heart signature from afar. Like that's the glitz that has a role. But I think what's going to be the exciting part is these tools, these technologies that are just going to measure things continuously in the home, right? Right. So I'm going to be in control. I'm going to collect the data. I'm going to be in control of the data, and it's going to help provide early diagnosis, or it's going to help with things. That's the new remote patient monitoring, right? The wearables,
right?
But wearables that are going to be in our clothes. Like that's what's exciting, right? I'm not going to have to put it on my wrist. It's going to be in my shirt. I mean, I think we have to work some of those things out. Textiles are the new, wearable. But it's an exciting time to be involved in health tech. And that's where I think we're going to see the greatest advances. So you want to talk about science innovation? That's what's innovative about those. And they're not necessarily the most glitzy thing, but if I can have a mirror that can check for skin cancer, if I can have a bath mat that's providing me all these metrics and measuring it over time, because I'm removing the fact that I have to do something, whether it's, sync things or whatever. That's what's going to be really interesting.
I love that. I carry one of these things around too. And it's like, but it ties back to the point that you made earlier around the data-enabled patient, right? Lots of information out there. And I'm really excited to hear about this health tech sector because we have so much innovation. I think there's a need to educate the public on these innovations. And I think WebMD plays an important role in doing that. So thank you for
mentioning the bathroom's going to be the new doctor's office. I'm writing that down. I'm serious. I am writing it down.
There you go. I mean, that's literally a headline of an article in itself, right? And some of the information that you and I might be privy to, some of the audience might not even know about that. So there's that room for education and to really inform the public on novelty, on innovation, not just for the sake of it. You don't want a shiny gadget for the sake of it, but how can it improve your health, right?
And it's going to be iterative. So it may not be exactly where we need to be next year, but the next year and the next year and the next year, we're going to have these great improvements.
Yeah, it gets better with time. And so I only have two more questions for you. Obviously, I could talk to you all day, but I'm curious to find out what you think will be some key consideration factors that will be important for sustaining innovation in the life science industry.
Yeah, I think we have to have investment. I mean, these technologies, these tools take resources, they take money. So we have to encourage innovation. And sometimes we have to fund things that don't work. It's high risk, but it can also be high reward. We can't be too afraid of risk and too risk averse if we really want to make scientific innovations. So we need to have that investment. We need to have that capital. We need to have that human capital of people entering the field to do this type of work. And then we need participants to help test this out and see if we're getting, in the right direction. That's where I think we need to work to make sure that we're going to have that, financial capital, but also that human capital as well.
Those two are very important. And I think it ties back to the point that you made earlier. Even if we have to test any drugs for clinical trials, they're quite expensive, right? And if we don't have the investment dollars, how can we sustain the innovation? Yeah. So in closing, I wanted to find out if you have any other commentary or thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap today.
I think what you're doing is terrific, that you're having the discussions, you're having different perspectives, encouraging dialogue. That's what I think is going to get us where we need to be as we think about, what are the next round of innovations. And I think we're kind of having a reset from the pandemic of what's really important. And self-care in terms of your health. You know, we often talk about health as wealth. It really is. And if we don't have our health, we don't have anything. So how are we going to have those innovations that are going to truly impact our health outcomes? I heard a great line the other day. I'm going to steal it from someone interviewed me. He said, it's not about our lifespan. It's about our health span.
Wow.
Peter Bose, I want to give him credit. And I thought that's a great perspective. That's really what we all want. We all want terrific health,
Yeah.
especially as we age. And innovation is the way that we get there.
Well, thank you for walking us through your story, your journey, for inspiring us with your wisdom. I think the well-span, your overall well-being, it's not just physical health, it's mental health.
Yeah.
It's taking the time to be mindful. And thank you for leading the path and encouraging us to look out, to take care of ourselves and to educate ourselves on emerging technologies and scientific innovation. So I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for allowing me to have some time. I appreciate talking to you.